had this idea.
I
Maybe
do.
what we do.
I think what we should do is put together a really informative video on what it means to cruise. Like, we could have a go-to video basically, because right now everybody's just touching on the subject or what it means for them in their area. But if we could actually reach out to a lot of different
Because we met a lot of
sailors.
people in the last 2 years that are still either in the Caribbean or in the South Pacific or anywhere around the world.
Do a bunch of research, make it easy for somebody to be like, okay, well, what does this really mean if I did end up buying a boat now?
Because I think that's a fear for some people.
Absolutely. Nobody can get to the boats to look at them anyways.
Right.
So
what it's
where
like
you
to
can
cruise
be,
now.
where you can go right now, and what it's going to mean, what it's likely going to mean in the future.
Cruising in COVID.
Yeah.
Around.
Cruising.
It didn't take long after getting back to the boat or sailing to a couple places before we started to really notice how much COVID was going to affect our sailing plans. COVID-19 has undoubtedly affected the world and has changed the way people are going to forever travel now. While we were feeling pretty good about where we were, sailing freely throughout the Sea of Cortez and basking in the present moment, we began to ponder about what sailing and cruising is going to be like as well as going forward. We had some pretty heavy questions we started to ask ourselves.
Does this mean that we're going to have to get tested in every new country now?
Right, and how much is each test going to cost us? What kind of new check-in procedures are they going to require upon entry to the country? So what happens if the country shuts down in the middle of our passage across the Pacific Ocean?
What countries are even open right now? These are only a few questions we've been asking ourselves, so we can imagine there are plenty others out there asking themselves the same questions. What's the future of sailing going to be like? With borders all over the world being closed and locked down, it leaves many blue water sailors and liveaboards wondering what's next amidst this unstable situation. Ernest Hemingway had it right. The sea is truly the last free place on the planet. However, liveaboards all over the globe are caught by government emergency measures as harbors close and drastic restrictions clamp down on free movement.
Look, everyone, including ourselves, is extremely excited to up anchor and move from country to country as they start to open their borders. But that may not be possible or practical right now. The uncertainty and instability of many of these countries has even changed our plans of crossing the Pacific this spring, and now we're doing our best to drum up a plan C. Now we realize that we may be addressing an issue that could be completely irrelevant in the few short months ahead, mostly because the information is changing faster than the weather does.
Luckily for us, we found ourselves in Mexico at the height of COVID and where we spent the majority of the pandemic. So we have a lot of gratitude for the universe in guiding us here, giving us plenty of opportunities to still sail around with a massive cruising ground and the ability to still live our lives undisrupted.
That being said, it has impacted us, and it's continuing to impact us. We realize it's not nearly as severe as many other places in the world, but the big picture is there are significant changes that are going to affect all of us.
9/11 is a perfect example of drastic changes to travel and tourism. Policies that were put in place 20 years ago are still affecting us and how we travel today. While new security procedures post 9/11 was mostly specific to U.S. air travel with the creation of TSA, needless to say, the crisis promoted swift response. And now, the challenge for the COVID crisis is not just one country, it's everywhere. Yet again, changes to the travel industry are manifesting regularly. Travel, specific to airline industry in late 2001, experienced many of the ills it is seeing now, but on a completely new level. Governments globally are quickly drawing up new security measures in hopes to fully restore people's confidence and willingness to travel again.
We wanted to know what it was like for others in other parts of the world, so we reached out to a bunch of other sailors and liveaboards to find out where they are, where they were, and what their experiences were during this pandemic.
And you ended up getting your boat up to the Rio Dulce where it was safe, right?
True. Yeah. Funny thing is the Guatemala allowed us to come, and Belize didn't want to give us permission to leave.
Get somebody in Amsterdam to house me for 2 weeks while I quarantined in Amsterdam. We were in Grenada, as much as we still are in Grenada.
Yeah.
Key West, right? See, I only thought I was going to be in Tavernier for a few days, and luckily my hostess, I got to stay there for free.
And most importantly, we asked them what their plans were going forward.
Good. Actually, that takes us to our first question, I guess, is what your plans are now with COVID being in place.
Right, well, our plans are always changing because of the whole situation, obviously. We have told ourselves, and we've tried to not plan any further than like 1 month ahead, because while we have these big round plans, I just don't think it's feasible to get your hopes up on one particular direction and try and head towards that. You just don't know at this stage. Our plan for the next month is to head up to St. Martin.
Okay. Nobody really knows what to expect, but what we do know is plans and sailing are like oil and water. They just will not mix. And this is just one of the many lessons we have learned over the last 2 years. And while we have managed so far to get to most of the destinations we have wanted to go, occasionally wrecking ourselves with terrible weather conditions,
And reevaluated our entire situation.
Just battling the wind, trying to get north enough to get safe and east enough to get to Jamaica.
just to get to somewhere and welcome friends aboard for a week of fun in the sun, is something we have to accept in terms of planning for our next routes. It's like what Dana said.
A cruiser's plans are written in sand at low tide.
So while our plans are getting washed away with every changing tide, we realize that everyone else is too. And that is just another part of the many obstacles sailors and liveaboards deal with already. With plans having to be more flexible, or fluid for the lack of a better word, it's all that we can expect for the time being, especially as countries slowly open borders and others remain shut down for, well, who knows how long. It is sure keeping cruisers on our toes for when we can move along or even return to our boats for that matter. Like James, who is in the middle of purchasing a boat.
This is a crazy story, actually, because I've bought the boat sight unseen. That was part of the deal. Like, you get the boat for this price only if you buy it sight unseen. I was like, shit, and I didn't know how to get to it because Curacao was closed. So the whole time, Curacao, like every week it was different. It was like, no, now Aruba's on the red list. Now Aruba's on the green list. Now this place is on the green list, but now that's on the red list. It was like almost bi-weekly updates of this craziness that was just, I mean, like, I couldn't plan for anything. I just basically had to be like, okay, well, if I can't get to my new boat, I just spent every dime I have on this thing for nothing, really. I mean, I guess I have it.
So as for James, in addition to a whole lot of other things he was going through,
We sent a helicopter to your position to hoist you off of your vessel. Would you feel comfortable leaving the vessel behind? Over.
he was just trying to figure out whether or not he made the right decision, or if he can get back to his boat and continue sailing around the world.
I mean, I understand the measures for safety for other people, and I like to be responsible, but they're going a little crazy. I mean, I guess here they're talking about having mandatory vaccinations and huge fines for breaking curfew, and basically it's like a totalitarianistic state here, man. It's crazy.
Wow. It is certainly crazy, and it has also presented an entirely new set of hurdles that we will now have to face. And jumping through hoops or going over hurdles is what sailors do best, honestly. As we've come to discover, whether it's checking in, getting a taxi ride, to get groceries, or hunting around to a dozen different spots to find one boat part, it is a task. And in our few short years of cruising, the requirements, paperwork, and authorizations needed sometimes seemed ridiculous, and especially when each country is totally different. You kind of just have to roll through the punches. While so much can feel redundant or unnecessary, we do realize that these steps are just a grain of sand on the beach compared to all the positives that this life affords.
You know what, guys? I gotta be optimistic here, and I think that it's gonna be a little harder, and it's gonna weed out some of the people that aren't willing to jump through the hoops, but everything about cruising is just jumping through hoops. Sometimes it takes 4 days to check in to somewhere. Sometimes, I mean, you know, Mexico is insane. You had to have like 6 copies of everything, one copy for each person.
And while we're all figuring out what hoops to jump through next per each new destination, some liveaboards are deciding what hoops are more reasonable according to their dreams and their plans. like Adam and Kiara from Sailing Millennial Falcon.
St. Martin, Antigua, and Barbuda seem to be all quite reasonable in their approach. Like, you still have to quarantine and play the game. Relatively speaking, that's, in my opinion, reasonable. And it's also a decent sail, and it'll be a bit of fun for us, and a chance to put some decent miles under the keel. Before we sort of
Finally.
wait for the next big jump.
Okay, so that brings us to what new procedures we will have to face just to continue. While it seems like more of a pain in the aft, the new requirements that will most likely be a part of the long list of things to do, it was already a pain in the aft. Authorities in many countries are adapting new regulations to seaboarders, which are all going to vary. But generally speaking, most countries will require mandatory quarantine, such as in Grenada, negative COVID tests performed before your arrival, like in Martinique, travel and medical insurance for the duration of your stay to cover any costs due to COVID, like in Costa Rica, or possibly certain tasks that we were able to do on our own will now be done by agents, like refueling or reprovisioning in the Maldives. And some places in the South Pacific, like Fiji, will want you to have your AIS vessel tracking on from the time you depart your current destination for your arrival, to ensure that you have gone from destination A to B directly with no stops in between, or a mandatory 14-day quarantine will be asked of you upon your arrival, basically resetting your sea time as a valid quarantine time. Now, after looking over the list of details shared and updated by Noonsight, the cruiser's ultimate planning tool online, there's going to be more than just paperwork and tests to expect. Pre-departure planning will be essential, and calling or organizing contacts ahead of time in your prospective destination will be key. These are the obvious things, of course, but in addition to this, time and money will be another factor for your sailing plans.
Yeah. Like, at the moment, a lot of the islands are open. If you have the time and the money to visit St. Vincent Grenadines, St. Lucia, Antigua, Barbuda, St. Martin, Dominica,
majority of the
you can do all these things, but you might be up from anywhere from $60 to 400 EC and 10 days quarantine at each place.
Which could be prohibitively expensive for some sailors and not even a consideration for others.
I think it's a spectrum. You've got like the lifelong retirees types who just move at their leisure, will spend a whole hurricane season in one bay.
Right.
Be quite happy.
Yeah.
And they've got limited funds, but it works for them.
Right.
Or you've got the like sabbatical types with more money than time, who are just blazing a trail. They're on their way home now, basically. And they're like, we'll stuff it.
Yeah.
I've got 1 year left. I'm not sitting around holding on them, sitting on my hands.
Yeah.
So now, with all the new logistics and formalities in place, it's a question of whether people still find this lifestyle of traveling and sailing worth it. And is there a loss of desire or appeal? Do you think people are still going to want to do it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think it's going to change radically. Okay. I was going through the Caribbean the first time around. I spent in each country, I spent maybe 2 or 3 days, and then I moved on. I'm going to be forced to basically slow down.
I think it's galvanized us more because I know now, I guess in a way, I can see how quickly that freedom can be taken away.
Okay, if you take nothing else away from the video, let's focus on this one point real quick that Adam so eloquently stated. Our freedoms that we have enjoyed, almost taken for granted, are not guaranteed. They can go away. And so for us, this has absolutely cemented our desire, almost need to live this lifestyle.
I would say we're kicking ourselves for not moving faster and further when we had the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And we had justifications for doing what we did at the time. Nobody knew how it was going to turn out, but
of course
we could have done more.
Yeah.
The freedom we had at the time. It's such a logistical nightmare relative to how it was.
Correct.
I really wish we did more with the freedom we had.
Right.
Who was to know 2020 was going to be quite so 2020?
Yeah. Hindsight 2020. Now we know that's a lot of information, and not all questions are possible to answer completely. Of course, all of this is going to be based on individual circumstances and risk tolerance, just like any other year for that matter. But now the stakes are higher. It's going to require a lot more patience, perseverance, and skill just to have a happy, safe, and comfortable cruising season.
That's right. And the point is that there can be no real clear answer when all the nations have a different pandemic strategy and they're all bracing for a dreaded second wave and possible vaccine results.
But out of all the research we have done, and from everyone we have talked to also living aboard during this time, we are still very positive about living this sailing lifestyle.
That being said, by nature, cruisers are adaptable. Our environment, our weather, our favorite destinations, they're all changing constantly.
COVID-19 is another hurdle. It's just another test to our ability to adapt, so that we can go out and enjoy the fascination of the boundless blue. Even despite having to cancel our Pacific crossing plans for March, we see it as a beautiful opportunity to spend more time here before crossing that big-ass ocean.
All right, well that does it. You guys, thanks a lot for watching. Hopefully you got something out of it. Thanks especially to anyone who contributed and lent us their experience.
Yes, thank you very much. I have put their links to their channels in the description below, along with any other links for sites that are useful for us while we cruise and travel the world.
Thank you very much.
Cheers!
Bye.